shell of Maverick cards, right? I see, when looking at the deck list, I see Thalia, I see Gaddock Teague, I see none of the Reliquary, Noble Hierarch, but then it takes a little bit of a turn.
Yeah, he's got the 4 Geist of St. Trapped. He's running 3 Stoneforge Mystic, which is in contrast to the usual, 1 or none you'd see in many Maverick lists. And he has a bit of a top end in the 2 Armageddons and 2 Elspeth Knight Errant. And in lieu of a Batterskull, he runs an Umezawa Jitte and a Sword of Fire and Ice. Maverick doesn't really need Batterskull, it usually just runs Jittes, but BBD, liking the sword.
So if I look at that, the cards which we normally see, the Scavenging Oozes, those are gone. We're seeing Elspeths and an equipment package. It seems like he's going more for a post-Geddon late game.
Yeah. Amusingly enough, BBD has told me he's about 50-50 to win following the casting on Armageddon, which I kind of think is not where you want to be with a large sorcery in Legacy. Could contrast that with Show and Tell players.
Andrew Cavanaugh's on Goblins here, so he leads us off on Plateau. No turn 1 play. Yeah. Both players actually just making dual lands without casting any spells, but we'll probably see some action going on turn 2. It looks like Cavanaugh has taken 1 or maybe even 2 mulligans here.
Yeah, peculiar to see from both players as their decks are filled with 1-drops. Obviously, Goblins has, Vile, Lackey, a few other random ones like, perhaps a Prospector. And BBD is all about the 1-drops. He's got Noble Hierarchs, he's got Deathrage Shamans, he has Green Sun's Zeniths to search for Dryad Arbors, but he does not have Mother of Runes, which is a card he cut. Yesterday he had them in the deck, so I guess he decided those were not his jam.
Yeah, so Andrew Cavanaugh is going to make a first play here in Goblin Pile Driver. He, like Max Teats last round, he's playing a full 4 Pile Drivers in his main deck.
It's interesting. There are apparently 2 schools of Goblin thought going on right now, which is, the double-striking Zendikar Goblin Warren Instigator versus Goblin Pile Driver, and I think Pile Driver is currently in vogue.
Right. So from Brian plays a turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic. He assembles more of his mana base here. It looks like he has a Scrub land in addition to the Savannah he led off on, and he finds Umezawa's Jitte.
Jitte and Sword of Fire and Ice are both actually quite good against Goblins. I suppose Jitte is probably a little bit better, considering that his opponent's on the play, and thus the life gain might come into being more effective.
So I think interesting about Brian's deck is when he chose the equipment that he wants to run, he distilled 2 pieces of equipment, but the first one's Jitte, but the second one is not Batterskull. So he actually has no Batterskulls in the main deck, or I believe even in the 75.
He has 1 Batterskull in the sideboard, actually. That is his 3rd and final piece of equipment in the 75.
All right, so from Andrew Cavanaugh, we see he adds to his team with the Goblin Lackey, but he's going to have a little bit of trouble pushing through that the Stoneforge Mystic, at least this turn. He follows up with a Wasteland and then passes the turn back.
Well, I kind of think he might have been able to sneak in for a point with Goblin Pile Driver there, as Brian probably has to be scared of a Gem Palm Incinerator. So I just pre-combat, don't play the Goblin Lackey and go ahead and attack. You might get in a point. Brian might just call him down and block.
Right, at this point the jig's up. If he had the Gem Palm Incinerator,
he would have just used it.
Yeah, the Mystic would be dead once he played the second card.
Yeah, so now Brian has, not only knows, he's actually certain Andrew does not have a Gem Palm Incinerator.
All right, so Brian follows up with a second Stoneforge Mystic, getting his other piece of equipment, which is the Sword of Fire and Ice, and he continues to push his advantage on the board as he Green Sun Zeniths for 0, getting Dryad Arbor.
Yeah, that's going to give him access to potentially 5 mana next turn, and considering he's got a Jitte and a Sword of Fire and Ice and 2 creatures active, plus the Dryad Arbor being a potential 3rd, things could get really hairy for Andrew and really fast.
Right, so when I think about plays like this, Green Sun's nothing for Dryad Arbor, not a play I really think of when I think Armageddon deck.
The thing is the ramp that lets you enable, turn 2 Geist of St. Trapped, turn 3 Geddon. I think the Arbor primarily functions in that role. It's obviously inconvenient at times, but at the same time, BBD is also a Knight of the Reliquary deck. Dryad Arbor's always been valuable in those decks as the ability to search out a blocker. In this particular situation, it's a little more awkward because Andrew has access to Wasteland, but Wasteland could kill any of BBD's lands, so the Dryad Arbor is actually probably the, 3rd most appealing target on the board, with the white lands probably drawing much more of Andrew's fire.
All right, so Andrew, despite having to be the more aggressive deck here, or wanting to be it, is a little bit on the back foot right now. He knows that Brian has an Umezawa's GT in his hand, so he's cracking Wooded Foothills, grabbing another mountain. Still low on cards. As of note, we just confirmed Andrew did start on a 5-card hand here to Brian's 7, so he's down, because he was on the play, also down a full 3 cards.
Yeah, Goblin Ringleader could turn that around, though, and that's what Andrew's playing now. reveals the top 5. Another
And,
ringleader.
Yeah, a second ringleader, Wooded Foothills, a Gem Palm Incinerator, another Gem Palm Incinerator. So a 4 mana, it draws 3, and each of these cards looks like it draws more cards.
Yeah, that was actually a really strong ringleader. Even Jitte could actually be overcome by that sheer number of cards. Andrew can, lose one or two guys, but the Incinerators will draw him cards and keep the Jitte from developing much further.
All right, so a swing here by Andrew Cavanaugh. He swings the ringleader and the pile driver. Pile driver will pump up to a 3/2. Brian has an opportunity to trade a Stoneforge Mystic with the pile driver, it looks like.
Yeah. I'm not sure what I would do here. I think that that's fine if you want to run that. It mostly depends on whether BBD has a 5th land in his hand. If he has a 5th land, I'm fine with it, because then I would just immediately slam Sword of Fire and Ice on the surviving Stoneforge Mystic, attack in with that, kill another guy, and that outlaws all of those Gem Palm Incinerators. You cannot Gem Palm Incinerate a creature equipped with Sword of Fire and Ice, and once the Jitte gets onto that creature as well, it should be lights out, or something very close to
Looks
it.
like Brian agrees with the play too, as he makes the double block on Gem Palm Incinerator. Brian's going to take 2, so the score goes to 18-18. But yeah, the one Gem Palm trades with the Stoneforge Mystic, and it sounds like we're going to see a hit back with a Jitte.
Well, I think he would like to do Sword.
Okay,
If
well,
he has
sword.
if he has a 5th land. At least that's what I would
Just for the
prefer to do.
protection.
Yeah, the protection against those 2 Incinerators, because if he slams in with a Jitte, he's then forced on the next turn to make the choice of whether he can try and protect his guy. He knows Andrew has, another ringleader and the 2 Incinerators available. So the Jitte is not quite the protection he might have hoped for.
So if I'm getting this, it sounds like, so you'd want to lead out on the sword here at least, because then you can put the Jitte on it later.
Right.
Especially he knows he has double Gem Palm Incinerator.
Yeah, and that's exactly what BBD lines up here. He's attacking in for 3 damage. He's going to get to draw a card. He's going to kill a Goblin. And killing a Goblin immediately also goes ahead and devalues those Gem Palm Incinerators.
Right, so that link up, Brian draws a card, kills a Goblin, knocks Andrew down to 15. That's all he has for the turn, but Andrew's going to have to recover from this situation. And as a mono red deck, this is a pretty difficult thing to do. He's going to have to first do it, I would imagine, by answering the artifact.
Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of solutions available. His removal spell in the main deck, Warren Weirding, is currently being blanked by Dryad Arbor. He'd have to Wasteland first, and he doesn't even have the black mana. What's his Goblin removal of choice? Tinkerer. Tinkerer's the slowest of the options. Most people run Tin Street Hooligan, or they run Tuk Tuk Scrapper. Goblin Tinkerer, if I recall correctly, has to tap to destroy his artifacts.
Right, which wouldn't really work because of how Sword of Fire and Ice works.
Once you drop Sword of Fire and Ice onto a guy, the 2 damage going around is going to be trouble, and the Jitte is, of course, going to be even more trouble.
Right, so Andrew Cavanaugh with another insane Goblin Ringleader. This one's going to draw 4 cards. It's going to draw Wart Boggart Auntie, Siege Gang Commander.
That's Goblin Tinkerer.
Goblin Tinkerer, and the 4th one, I believe, is Mog War Marshal.
Yep. So, all certainly live-ish. The problem is Brian has, double Abyss in play, basically, and he's going to draw a card every time he connects with it.
Yeah, Andrew actually doesn't have another land, though. He has 8 cards. He's going to have to move to discard. The reason you talk about cards like Tin Street Hooligan, Andrew is doing a double splash, which seems to be kind of the norm in Goblins. He is splashing white for Thalia's out of the board, and then, as we saw there, he's splashing black for Weirding, and more importantly, for Wart Boggart Auntie.
Yeah, Wart's an interesting choice. It seems, to me personally at least, that she had fallen out of favor once Krenko got printed. But, still fills a very similar role, and I can't really fault someone for playing her, especially if they want access to other black cards on the sideboard. Cabal Therapy is not an unusual choice. Andrew's not running those, but he does have access to Perish. Perish is a big one.
Yeah. So, the discard there is Mog War Marshal. He's going to pass the turn back to Brian Braun-Duin. He has 2 these 2 Goblin Ringleaders attacked, putting Brian to 14. And it kind of looks right now like he's going to try to race the Stoneforge Mystic as opposed, since he has no answer to it.
Yeah, that's pretty much all he can do. As Sword plus Jitte is just going to kill all his creatures. And Brian here attacking without equipping the Jitte. That's a troubling thing for Andrew, because he knows the Jitte's there, and that's an appealing play. Yeah, he has something better than Umezawa's Jitte this turn.
All right, so that play's gonna be made here, and might we see? And yeah, we are going to see Armageddon from Brian Braun-Duin, and that would be the play. I think that's better than casting Umezawa's Jitte.
Sure sounds like it. It seems like he floated up mana, and he's going to go ahead and play a land and play the Jitte now. And he's like, hey, okay, Andrew. You were doing all right. Deal with this.
All right, well, Andrew, that doesn't even draws a card.
Yeah, Andrew has one solution for this.
Right, so Brian with the first game. So, interestingly enough, Andrew cast 2 Goblin Ringleaders. I think by all accounts, those are some of the best Goblin Ringleaders I've ever seen.
They were good.
And still, very short order loses the game.
Yeah, the issue here is Goblins was very much forced to assume the control role in a position where it wasn't really, inclined to do that. He was on 5 cards, so he was already a little bit behind, and Brian established very quickly with those Stoneforge Mystics. Not only did they draw him extra cards, but the cards they got were so good. Sword of Fire and Ice just took him apart in a hurry. Now, if he'd had, a Gem Palm Incinerator for those Stoneforge Mystics or something, establish a Tinker before a Sword of Fire and Ice started hitting him, could have been a completely different game, like very, very winnable for Andrew. The ringleaders like that have a habit of putting games away. But he didn't have a way to stop what Brian was doing, and in those 2 turns where Brian seized a gigantic advantage, it put him so far ahead that there was nothing Andrew could do.
And so out of the sideboards, which they're going to right now, we noticed that Braun-Duin is playing the Maverick deck, and we have written up their Maverick, though that's a little bit of a misnomer in the sense that it's not what you'd expect out of a Maverick deck. You already said he's playing Geist of St. Trafts in the main, and he does have a pair of Armageddons. What does he have access to in the sideboard then for this matchup?
His sideboard is actually pretty common for Maverick, or at least for some of the builds I've seen recently. I know that Thoughtseize going into Maverick was something I saw Dave Doburn doing in Seattle in the Legacy portion there. He was playing a very Maverick-ish deck with access to discard being the primary reason he went into black. And BBD is doing that as well. He has 4 Thoughtseize in the sideboard. Obviously not for this matchup, but certainly an interesting addition. He's also running 4 Meddling Mage. Again,
That's a lot of Meddling Mages.
Not this matchup, but yeah, and it's not the first Meddling Mage we've seen this weekend either. I know. Right. I think Todd and Brad are both running them as well. I wonder if they've tracked down Chris at the top tables and
so is this
sucker sign.
Right. So is this a reaction to prevalence of Show and Tell?
Yeah, I think so. I know personally, Show and Tell is a deck that virtually no one in Roanoke tends to play. Brad, I think, is the only one who's really given it a go, and they all hate losing to it, though.
So Meddling Mage is just there for the most part to name Show and Tell.
Yeah, although Todd said he didn't really like the one they were running so much in Esper Deathblade, and he's considering replacing them with Iona, Shield of Amerias.
Oh, so just instead, just to try to one-up the Show and Tell.
It's much worse against Sneak and Show, but he thinks that people seem to be audibling mostly towards that End of the Infinite deck, and Iona's a stone-cold beat against them.
All right.
The cards that I see BBD bringing in, perhaps in this matchup, he has access to a Kasali Pride Mage. He has Green Sun Zenith, and that's like a reasonable way to dismantle a Vial. It's also just, a pretty good 2-drop.
Now, do you feel in this matchup, does Brian, if he sees an Ether Vial from Andrew Cavanaugh, does he need to dismantle the Vial, or can he just continue to play against it?
I think it varies depending on Brian's draw. When he is on the draw, it's a much more dangerous card. Because Andrew can do exactly what BBD did to Andrew, get so far ahead on the board that he can't really catch up. BBD's cards that catch him up are significantly stronger. We saw them in play there. Sword of Fire and Ice and Umezawa Jute can both take a lost game and turn it around. But at the same time, it can be tricky, especially with an active Vial. As far as other interesting cards, I think a pair of Abrupt Decays might come in for perhaps the same purpose, but they're a little less versatile than Kasali Pride Mage in that he can't search for them, and they're not a creature that attacks when he doesn't need the effect.
All right. So in Andrew Cavanaugh's sideboard, going over to there, not too much that you wouldn't expect out of Goblins. He does have Pyrokinesis, which is typically used, I know, in creature matchups. The one card which I saw in there, which is interesting, he does have he has the one Tuk Scrapper you were looking for. That's actually in his board. He prefers the Tinkerer in the main. And he does also play 2 Orim's Thunder in the sideboard.
Orim's Thunder is a sweet one. I haven't seen that one in a while. Why don't we go ahead and bring that up on screen if we can. Orim's Thunder is an invasion common disenchant, or I should say invasion block. I think it's actually from Apocalypse. But it disenchants, and for a kicker of red mana, throws the damage at one of your opponent's creatures.
Right. So, Andrew, I'm curious. I love the card. I'm wondering what it's targeted for. If there's a specific enchantment he has in mind, or whether he's just going to use it in general against artifacts and enchantments.
My guess is it's pretty common for Goblins to want access to a disenchant effect of some kind. People have splashed green for Crow's Grip many times.
Just they can't beat Batterskull?
Right. It's good against Batterskull. It's just, a reasonable thing to have access to in Legacy. Moat is stone unbeatable for the deck otherwise, for example. So having outs to a card like that is pretty reasonable. And people tend to just find the option that they prefer. Crow's Grip has been the standard. People have certainly run literal disenchant. Cedric and I did that at the Las Vegas Legacy Open about a year ago, I think. Or at least I ran disenchant.
Having run that, Orim's Thunder, for it to be better than disenchant, you have to use 4 mana.
Yeah.
As just a disenchant, it costs 3, but for 4 you can get a pretty good kicker. Comparing the two, how much time does Goblins have to disenchant?
Well, the trick is it's not just 4 mana. Your opponent also has to have a creature that's worth, using that 4th mana. Otherwise, it is strictly worse. So I'm personally not a big fan of the choice of Worm's Thunder, although my money is on the fact that Andrew, tried it out, found out he liked it in a couple of key spots. A deck like Brian's seems like an ideal spot for it, to be honest.
And speaking of Worm's Thunder, we do see it in Andrew's opening hand. He is on the play. He has a 2-land hand, a little bit of a one that he has to think about, as the only lands in it were Wasteland and Cavern of Souls.
Yeah.
And it turns out he doesn't have to think about it at all. It's going to 6.
Now, if that hand had an Aether Vial in it, Andrew can keep it, and that's one of the strengths of the Disenchant things in Brian's sideboard is it can punish Andrew for these aggressive keeps. Goblins is a deck filled with a lot of colorless lands, caverns, wastelands, and of course Rashadan ports. And Aether Vial is one of the ways that you hedge against getting color screwed. And if you can destroy those, you can actually sometimes catch the Goblins player without an ability to play spells.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the Goblins deck has 22 lands, 10 of which are colorless. So almost half his lands do not. Do not produce colored mana. Well, the Caverns produce it to cast Goblins, but to cast actual spells. So when we look at the number of white sources Andrew Cavanaugh actually has for splashed white cards, he has a Plateau. He has some 3 Wooded Foothills, 2 Bloodstained Mires, and that's actually it. He only has 6 white sources in the deck.
That's a little light, I feel like.
For white spells. If we count Thalia, he gets out. That 6 goes up to 9 thanks to Cavern of Souls.
A Vial can certainly slide in a Thalia. One of the things to keep in mind in this matchup is that having actual, real red mana is a little more important because cycling Gem Palm Incinerator is very key. Being able to kick those Orm's Thunders, that's going to matter. Also, just having a basic mountain against a deck that many people would assume runs Wasteland. BBD does. He has 4. It matters. You don't want to just be stuck without the ability to play your spells, or even worse, play your relevant spells. That's the worst.
Right. So both players actually keeping on 6. Andrew Cavanaugh's going to lead off on Bloodstained Mire. It's looking like this is going to make Goblin Lackey. Interesting whether he could get Mountain, Plateau, or Badlands. Interesting to see which way he'll go with it.
Yeah, I saw him pass a Plateau and a Badlands, so that implies Mountain, and yep, there he goes.
All right. And typically on Landlight hands, I think Andrew would do this just because he needs to protect himself from Wasteland.
Yep, and that's a wise choice.
So we see Goblin Lackey for him. It appears like he has possibly he has a Goblin Matron at least in his opener, and another land.
It looks like a Wasteland.
Tuk Tuk Scrapper, a Goblin Matron, and then
two
Goblin
Matrons.
Yep. Okay, I would agree. Brian has a tournament play of his own. It's going to be a Dryad Arbor. Actually, and not only is it a tournament ramp spell, it's also an answer to that Goblin Lackey.
Yeah, BBD's like, you want to attack? I got that guy locked up. Andrew, of course, has the answer already at the ready in Wasteland, and BBD knows Goblins plays Wasteland and Rashadan Port. He probably is not expecting this Dryad Arbor to necessarily run full blocks on Goblin Lackey, but at the same time, might as well give it a try.
Right, so Andrew with he's in a Wasteland here. He has no other lands outside of this Wasteland, so this Lackey may be the way he gets most of his Goblins into play.
Yeah, if he just drew what I thought he just drew.
And he just drew a Siege Gang Commander for the turn. That's the card I think which people, of all the things that you can Lackey into play, Siege Gang's got to rank pretty high on the list.
Yeah, and it's also one of the cards that really, we talked about how important it is to have an actual mountain in play. You can't Cavern of Souls to throw goblins at your opponent's creatures. You have to actually tap red mana for it. And Andrew fetching up that mountain, plays around Wasteland, and now the next land he has will turn any of those goblins into a shock, keep that Lackey rolling in. BBD is really far behind.
Well, yeah, I mean, Andrew played a 5-drop on turn 2, and no slouch 5-drop at that.
We see that BBD did bring in the Abrupt Decay. There's one at the bottom of his deck right there. And keep in mind the thing with the Siege Gang Commanders, BBD's playing under the assumption that his next couple of plays will actually be blanked by Siege Gang Commander, because he knows all Andrew needs to do is play a land, chuck a Goblin token at whatever BBD plays. What he doesn't know is Andrew doesn't have another land, so BBD has a much higher chance of getting in.
Andrew played the Wasteland last turn, so hasn't learned that yet. Brian plays this turn a Thalia, which is actually out of the sideboard. He's chosen to side this in against Goblins, despite the fact that Goblins is a mostly creature deck. Oh, he has Thalias in the main, actually.
Yeah, he's starting all 4. The Goblins deck is sideboarding Thalia.
Right.
And I imagine he just didn't have anything really worth taking these out. They are first strikers. They shut down Pile Driver. It's a creature-laden matchup.
Yeah, it's amusing because Brian has a lot more non-creature spells than Andrew does in the matchup, so it actually kind of hurts him to have this creature.
In fact, BBD, when he was first designing the skeleton for this deck, I mentioned that he was running Mother of Runes. One of the cards he wasn't running was Green Sun Zenith. I suggested that he might want to try it out, but he was very uncomfortable with the idea of running 4 Thalia main, and Zeniths, and Gaddens, and Elspeths. It's just really awkward.
So Andrew, shut down by the Thalia, doesn't play anything else to the board. He doesn't even hit his land. Brian also is stuck on 2 lands, but he plays Deathrite Shaman, Noble Hierarch, which are 2 cards that make mana. And I think it's fair to say, with Andrew missing 2 land drops, that Brian is pretty much equalized on the board.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say he's ahead. That one turn where that Thalia got to live and BBD didn't have to take, what would it be, 5 damage and another summon from a Goblin Lackey, that's a lot.
Right. So
BBD can now just play a Knight of the Reliquary, has access to even more mana than that.
So if Andrew hit the land that turn, he would have burned the Thalia, he would have been able to swing for 5 and then get a Lackey trigger.
Yeah, which, that's a pretty heavy snowballing advantage. I imagine it would be very difficult to lose from that position because BBD's next line would be something like, Mana Dork, take a bunch more damage, lose one of my Mana Dorks,
right.
Face another Lackey trigger. And because we know Andrew has, multiple Matrons in hand, each of those Lackey triggers is very dangerous.
All right, so we see that, as you were mentioning the play, we see Knight of the Reliquary cast by Braun-Duin. He uses all 3 of his lands to do it, leaving up Deathrite Shaman and Noble Hierarch, and looks like immediately exiling.
Yep, cast Kasali
exiling a land from Andrew's graveyard to cast Kasali Pridemage.
And here it's mostly just a Warm Body, as Andrew doesn't have a Vial, but as we stated during the sideboarding discussion, a Warm Body is totally fine in this matchup. Most of Andrew's creatures, without their effects, are just goblins.
Now, Andrew has drawn one of the cards off his board this turn. He's drawn Pyrokinesis, and even though it costs 1 more due to Thalia, he still has 1 land that's actually able to cast this. Remember, that's 4 damage divided anyway. He could take out 3 creatures, it looks like, with this 1 card.
Yeah, last turn, this Pyrokinesis would have just cleared BBD's board straight up. It would have destroyed Deathrite Shaman, Thalia, Noble Hierarch, and perhaps given Andrew exactly what he needed. Once more, he may be a turn too late.
Right. Andrew choosing to instant speed the Pyrokinesis. Interestingly, so that gives Brian the chance to untap with his mana creatures. Yeah, but he's holding up, just ships the turn back, still with 1 land in play.
BBD drew a Detention Sphere and gave it a little flick as he put it in his hand. He's probably pretty happy about that. It'll most likely kill these 3 Goblin tokens, and he's going to go ahead and cast it.
All right, so Detention Sphere is down. When it resolves, he is going to name Goblin token, so all 3 of those leave. Interesting. If you're Andrew, do you Pyrokinesis here to hit one of your own goblins and then some of Brian's things?
I think that's a totally reasonable line. And it looks like it's what Andrew is going to consider doing. Note that BBD did have to pay 4 for that Detention Sphere. Andrew now paying the 1 extra for his Pyrokinesis. He's going to zap his Goblin token, just as you described, zap the Thalia, zap Noble Hierarch, and then nothing.
Yep, 4 damage is going to be, 2 to Deathrite Shaman, 1 to Thalia, 1 to Goblin token, leaving the Noble Hierarch alive. So it's a 2 for 2.
It looked like he was going for the Hierarchy. He appears to have changed his mind and gone for the Deathrite Shaman. There are a ton of lands in BBD's graveyard, so that's probably a wise decision.
All right, Brian tanking on the play. He does have 1 mana available in Deathrite Shaman. Not sure how many 1 mana responses he actually has to this play.
He also has the choice of, I guess, sacking a land to Knight of the Reliquary and activating Deathrite Shaman to exile Dryad Arbor for 2 life. That's the only other discernible thing he could really do. Decides none of those things are really worth doing.
Right, so he looks to me like he wants to be protecting Knight of the Reliquary into a certain level. Does he have, a Sagiri step or anything else to protect it with?
No, he has nothing quite that tricky. He's mostly run-of-the-mill lands here. Beyond what we've seen as far as duels and wastelands, he does have Horizon Canopy, Dryad Arbor, Crocus. Those are only like truly unique lands. And here he's keeping his Knight at any time. He could just turn it into a 6/6, and that's pretty much fully protected against Gem Palm Incinerator in this position.
Yeah, so Andrew's still not finding his 2nd land. I think it's the fourth turn where he doesn't do it. On end step, Brian's going to sacrifice Tropical Island, which that's his source of blue mana. Well, one of his sources of blue mana, and it looks like he's going to get Horizon Canopy with it.
Yep. He has Noble Hierarch to keep him, in blue mana, as they say, but he only has a few cards in hand, and I imagine he'd be pretty keen to find one of his sweet pieces of equipment that would certainly just put this game out of commission in a hurry.
So does Brian need to find more cards right now, or can he actually win with just what's on the board?
I think that it's certainly possible for him to win with what's on the board, but it would, be a bit of a grind fest. He'd have to, attack and block kind of carefully. He doesn't want to expose his Knight, or even, necessarily his Kasali Pridemage, because those are the only creatures that can actually attack. So he's kind of going slow.
All right, well, Brian's going to, after his draw, he's going to replace the Deathrite Shaman that was killed, tapping Cavanaugh. Still has Horizon Canopy up and 1 card remaining in hand, and it looks like he's going to attack with Kasali Pridemage, which is now double exalted thanks to itself and the Noble Hierarch.
Yep, that's a 4/4. Andrew's going to certainly take the damage. His Goblin tokens are still more valuable than 4 life. but that's going to change in a couple of turns if he doesn't find a land.
Another draw from Andrew Cavanaugh. It's finally something he can cast, but it is not the land. It is another Goblin Lackey. Really just a 1/1 at this point.
Yeah. Despite that strong start, Goblin Lackey has basically been blanked by Brian's deck as it just fields a million creatures.
All right, so Brian, a couple options. He's going to first sacrifice the Horizon Canopy on the end step. Still has 1 mana available in his Noble Hierarch, or 2 mana with Noble Hierarch and Knight of the Reliquary. Opts not to use either of them.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to thin his deck at this point. He did just draw a Stoneforge Mystic, so he's probably looking to just cast it, get one of his sweet pieces of equipment, and preserve the amount of mana he has to guarantee that he can play and equip it, even if his Stoneforge Mystic were to theoretically die.
So the draw for turn is going to be Wooded Foothills. Brian plays Stoneforge Mystic, or sorry, the draw for the turn, yeah, it was Wooded Foothills.
Yeah.
The Stoneforge Mystic was off the Horizon Canopy.
Correct.
And it looks like he's going to grab, he's looking at Batterskull, and he's looking at Sword of Fire and Ice.
I imagine he's going for Sword or Jitte, yeah. The Batterskull seems a little redundant here, especially because as soon as Andrew draws a second land, Siege Gang Commander can effectively turn it off by flinging whatever goblin blocks it. And, the board will be stalemated, and BBD will put Andrew into the abyss, but at the same time, he's not, actually progressing nearly as much as Jitte would.
So interesting enough, it looks like Brian's going for a very aggressive option. He has, he's sacrificing sacrificing a fetch land to go ahead and grab a duel. If he uses all his creatures, he actually has enough mana to play and equip the Jitte onto Qasali Primate for a swing.
Yeah, and with Andrew tapped out this turn, that's about as good as it gets. He only really has to fear a Pyrokinesis. He's already seen Andrew play one of those, and he has to know that that one was drawn basically that turn, because on the turn before, that Pyrokinesis would have been insane.
Right. And we see him go through all the steps. So, tapping, removing a land from Andrew Cavanaugh's graveyard, with Deathrite Shaman, tapping Noble Hierarch, and now tapping Knight of the Reliquary, sacrificing the Tundra, grabbing yet another land untapped for the 6th mana of the turn that he needs to equip the Dumazao's Jitte. And on the way to do it, he's going to go ahead and throw a Misty Rainforest in the graveyard.
Sure, why not? Go ahead and grow that Knight a little bigger. At this point, BBD has gone through 5 of the 8 dual lands in his deck, so that's worth keeping in mind for Knight activations, but at the same time, that guy doesn't appear to be shrinking anytime soon.
Right, and once Knight gets to this level, it seems that the Goblin's deck the answers to it are few and far between. So we'll see it suited up to Qasali Primate, and he's going to exalt up to a 4/4 again on the attack.
Andrew decides to take the damage. Anything else would basically result in the complete and total destruction of his board. The question is, what will BBD do with these Jitte counters?
So 2 Jitte counters on the Dumazao's Jitte. Andrew drops to 11 from the attack. And
he only has Stoneforge Mystic on defense. And the thing is, even if Andrew draws a second land, he'll be able to theoretically Gem Palm Incinerator the Stoneforge Mystic out of the way should Brian kill the Siege Gang Commander.
Yeah. Does Brian know about a Gem Palm Incinerator?
He doesn't, but it's a reasonable expectation at this point that it could just kill his Stoneforge Mystic.
Andrew had to have something in his hand if he's not drawing lands.
Gotta have something. So he probably just decides to hold the 2 counters so that if something happens, he can kill the lackeys. And if Andrew just can't do anything, then BBD doesn't have to do anything either.
Andrew decides enough is enough. His next draw, taunting him almost, is another Goblin Lackey.
Yeah.
Now that he can't answer the Dumazao's Jitte, he scoops his cards, and Braun-Duin is the victor, 2-0.